Hey everyone, Elizabeth here. The Last Laugh delivers stories that leave you speechless. If you're here for it, hit subscribe and let's go.
The group text came in at 9:47 on a Tuesday morning. I was in the middle of reviewing a vendor contract, my second coffee going cold beside me, when my phone buzzed against the desk. I picked it up. Read it. Set it back down. Family dinner Saturday. Brasserie Laurent 7 p.m. Dad's 60th. Elena. Don't come. You know why? My Aunt Claudia responded within 2 minutes. A thumbs up emoji. Nothing else. Just that small, efficient endorsement, the kind that required zero explanation and offered zero accountability. My cousin Brent typed, "Honestly better this way." 3 more thumbs up followed, staggered across the next 4 minutes. My mother, who had been divorced from my father for 11 years and was somehow still invited to his birthday, added a heart. I read them all. Then I opened my reply field, typed a single word and hit send. I put the phone face down on my desk and went back to the contract. My assistant Priya knocked twice and opened the door a crack. She had been with me for 4 years and had learned to read the silence of my office the way a sailor reads weather. "Everything all right?" "Fine," I said. "Can you call Brasserie Laurent? I need to confirm an arrangement with their private dining coordinator." She nodded and disappeared without asking why. I sat for a moment longer than I needed to. The contract blurred slightly in front of me. I wasn't crying. I hadn't cried about my family in a long time, and I had made a quiet, deliberate peace with that fact. But there was something that lived just below the surface of these moments. Not grief exactly. More like the particular exhaustion of being asked again and again, to be surprised by people who had already shown you exactly who they were. You know why? I did know why. That was the thing. I had always known why. And knowing had never made it easier. I was the second of 3 children, and from the beginning I had occupied an awkward middle position. Not the eldest who carried my father's expectations like a title, and not the youngest who was small enough to be indulged. I was the one who asked questions at the wrong time. Who read too much and talked too little at family dinners. Who chose a university scholarship over the family business my father had spent 20 years building. A decision he treated less like a difference of opinion and more like a personal betrayal. "You think you're better than this," he said the September I left. I was 18. My duffel bag was by the door. "I think I want something different," I said. He turned back to his newspaper. Same thing. That was the template. Every holiday, every phone call, every birthday for the next 12 years had some version of that exchange woven into it. Me choosing something he hadn't sanctioned and him recording it as evidence of disloyalty. When I didn't come home for Christmas my second year of graduate school because I had a thesis deadline, that was evidence. When I moved to Chicago instead of coming back to work with my brother Marcus at my father's property management company, that was evidence. When I built something of my own, slowly then quickly, then in ways that made the back of my neck prickle because I didn't know how to explain it to people who hadn't watched it happen from inside, that was the worst evidence of all. My father had never said the word jealous. He would have died before saying it. But he had found 1,000 other words that meant the same thing, and he had trained the rest of the family to use them too. "Elena thinks she's too good for us. Elena doesn't show up when it counts. Elena's priorities aren't family priorities." And the one that had arrived eventually with the weight of a verdict. Elena isn't acting like family. Let me tell you what I was actually doing during those years while I was not acting like family. I graduated with an MBA from Northwestern at 25 and took a position at a mid-size commercial real estate consulting firm called Alderman Partners. I was good at the work. Faster than they expected, more careful than they needed, and possessed of an instinct for distressed properties that my supervising partner described as either a gift or a problem depending on the market. I stayed for 3 years, left with 2 clients who came with me voluntarily, and started Meridian Property Group out of a rented office the size of a large closet with Priya. Then my intern, and a second-hand conference table we carried up 3 flights of stairs ourselves. That was 7 years ago. Meridian now managed a portfolio of 41 commercial and mixed-use properties across Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin. We had 18 full-time employees. Our current under-management valuation sat at approximately $340 million. And we had closed 11 acquisition deals in the past fiscal year. 3 months before my father's birthday text, Forbes Midwest had named me one of the region's top real estate executives under 40. I had not told my family any of this. Not out of deception exactly. More out of a long and careful observation of what happened when I shared good news with people who had decided years before that my success was an affront rather than a cause for celebration. My brother Marcus had responded to news of Meridian's first major deal by asking whether I'd considered that I was showing off. My Aunt Claudia had once told my mother that she hoped I wasn't getting too big for reality. My father had simply stopped asking about my work, which was its own kind of answer. So I stopped offering. I showed up to family events when I was invited, which was increasingly rarely, dressed quietly, spoke little about work, asked about their lives. I was polite and a bit distant and exactly what they'd decided I was. The family member who had chosen herself over everyone else. There was a cost to this. I want to be honest about that. There was a version of my father I remembered from before the template solidified. A man who drove me to the library every Saturday morning before anyone else was awake, who had a laugh that filled a room, who told me once when I was 9 years old that I was the sharpest mind he'd ever known. That man existed. He still existed somewhere inside the one who sent Tuesday morning group text. And the distance I had built to protect myself from the second one meant I could never fully reach the first. That was the thing about good decisions. They were still losses. The Brasserie Laurent arrangement had begun 2 years earlier, entirely by accident. I had been negotiating the acquisition of a mixed-use building in River North, and the seller, a semi-retired restaurateur named Charles Fontaine, had included Brasserie Laurent in the portfolio. It was his original flagship, a 40-year-old French restaurant on Superior Street that had outlasted 3 neighborhood reinventions and maintained a consistent reputation for exceptional food and a dining room that felt, despite its expense, genuinely welcoming. Charles was 71 and tired and wanted to retire to Portugal. He accepted my offer on a Thursday afternoon and cried slightly, which he apologized for, and I told him not to. I meant it. I understood something about spending years building a thing and then having to decide what it was worth. As part of the sale, I had negotiated an arrangement for the private dining floor. A beautiful room on the second level with original oak paneling and a west-facing window, to be available on retainer to Meridian for client entertainment, staff events, and any other purpose I designated. I prepaid the year's retainer as a business expense, largely because Charles had seemed reassured by the idea that someone who intended to keep the restaurant running would have personal investment in using it. The retainer was real. The arrangement was documented. I had technically prepaid the entire private dining floor for the year. I had not planned what I was about to do with that fact. But when Priya came back to confirm the details and I asked her to make a small addition to the maitre d's standing instructions regarding my family name, something settled in me. Not revenge. Not even strategy exactly. More like the quiet decision to stop making myself invisible in rooms that I owned. I went back to my contract. I finished my coffee. I did not think about Saturday until Saturday came. The week between the text and my father's birthday had its own texture, distinct from the family drama I was keeping in a separate compartment of my mind. On Wednesday I met with the city planning office about a potential rezoning on a South Loop property, the kind of meeting that required 3 hours of preparation for 40 minutes of conversation, and which I found genuinely absorbing in a way that still surprised me after 7 years. I liked the puzzle of it. The way a building could become something different if you understood the rules well enough, not to break them but to work inside them with precision. Thursday, my lead analyst James walked into my office looking like he'd been awake since 4 in the morning, which I would discover he had, to tell me our bid on a Milwaukee warehouse complex had been accepted. We sat for a moment in the way you sit when something large and anticipated finally arrives, and then I told him to take the afternoon off and go home to his wife and new daughter, and he laughed and said he would, and then stayed until 7 anyway because that's who he was and I understood it completely. Friday evening I had dinner with my friend Dominique, who was a pediatric surgeon and had been my closest friend since our first week at Northwestern when we'd ended up in the same study room by accident and discovered we were both stress cleaning other people's messes. She was one of 3 people who knew the full picture of my life. The company, the portfolio, the family situation, the particular emotional geometry of all of it. She listened to me recount the group text while eating pasta and did not offer false comfort. "Are you going to be all right?" she asked. "I'm always all right," I said. She gave me the look she reserved for when I was technically correct and meaningfully evasive. "That's not the same thing." "No," I agreed. "It isn't." We talked about other things after that. Her daughter's new school, a documentary she'd been watching, The fact that we were both becoming people who described sleep as a treat rather than a baseline. I drove home with the windows down even though it was October and cold, because I needed the noise of the city to fill up the space where a sadder version of myself was trying to say something I wasn't ready to hear. Saturday I worked until 4 in the afternoon. At 5 I changed into a navy dress I'd bought in April and worn exactly once, put on the earrings Dominique had given me for my birthday last year, and went to Brasserie Laurent. Not for my father's dinner. That wasn't until 7. I went because Charles Fontaine, who was now retired in Lisbon but came back to Chicago twice a year for reasons he described as food-related nostalgia, was in town and had asked if I'd like to meet for an early glass of wine before his flight back. We sat at the bar downstairs and talked about Portugal and real estate and a conversation he'd had with his granddaughter about what it meant to build something. He was easy company in the way that people become easy when they've stopped needing to prove anything. He asked about the building, asked about Brasserie Laurent specifically, and I told him that the room upstairs had hosted 11 client dinners and 1 staff holiday party and that the chicken with the tarragon cream sauce had nearly caused a mutiny at Meridian because everyone wanted the recipe. He laughed. Henri will never give it out. I asked him for 30 years. At 6:30 Charles left for his car. I finished my wine, said goodnight to the bartender, and was gathering my coat when the maitre d', a composed silver-haired man named Pierre whom I had met twice before and who had the precise, unflappable courtesy of someone who had seen everything a dining room could produce, appeared at my elbow. Miss Reeves, he said. Just a note. Your family's party has been confirmed for the private floor. 7 o'clock. The arrangements you specified are in place. Thank you, Pierre. Shall you be joining them this evening? I considered that for a moment longer than the question seemed to warrant. No, I said. But thank you. I walked out into the October night and stood on Superior Street for a moment, watching the taxis and the couples and the particular amber glow of a city that had become, entirely by my own effort and no one else's, mine. My phone buzzed. A Forbes notification. A colleague had shared the Midwest executive piece again, tagging Meridian's account with a congratulatory comment. I put the phone in my pocket and walked to where I'd parked. The call came at 7:22 p.m. I was home by then, on my couch with a book I'd been trying to finish for 3 weeks, when the phone lit up with my father's number. I looked at it for one full ring. Then I answered. Elena. His voice was strange. Not angry, that I knew how to navigate. This was something I couldn't immediately place. Compressed. Like a man trying to hold several large things in his hands at once. Dad. We're at the restaurant. I know, I said. Happy birthday. Pause. I heard the ambient noise of a dining room, soft music, the clink of glassware, voices. The private floor at Brasserie Laurent on a Saturday evening. Pierre, the maitre d', he said. He told us that you. He stopped. Started again. He said the floor was prepaid. He said you own the building. I didn't correct him exactly. I own the property, yes. Brasserie Laurent is one of my holdings. Another pause, longer this time. I heard Marcus in the background saying something I couldn't make out and my Aunt Claudia's voice rising, and then my father's hand must have shifted over the phone because everything became muffled for a moment. When his voice came back it was quieter. How long? 2 years. And you never said anything. You uninvited me from your birthday dinner, I said. It came out gentler than I'd intended. I've been uninvited from quite a few things, Dad. I stopped offering information that wasn't being asked for. The silence this time was different. Not compressed. Just empty. Elena. I'm here. What is? He stopped again. I heard him exhale. What is your company? What do you actually do? And there was the question he had never asked. Not in 7 years. Not once. I told him. Not all of it, not the Forbes piece or the Milwaukee deal or the 41 properties. Those could wait or might never come at all, depending on what happened next. But the shape of it. Meridian. What it managed. What it was worth in broad terms. The fact that it was mine, built from a closet office and a second-hand table in 7 years of work he had never once inquired about. He listened without interrupting. That was new. When I finished there was a long pause and then he said very quietly, I didn't know. I know you didn't, I said. You didn't ask. But I should tell you what was actually happening in that dining room because my father's phone call was only the first wave. Marcus had been the one to approach Pierre first. He'd arrived early in his good blazer, and had gone straight to the maitre d's stand with the particular authority of a man who manages other people's property and has learned to move through service spaces with ease. He'd announced the reservation, Reeves' party, birthday dinner, private floor, and Pierre had smiled with genuine warmth and said of course the Reeves account, he knew it well. Marcus had assumed he meant the reservation. He'd nodded and been shown upstairs to the beautiful oak-paneled room where the west window was already glowing with the last of the evening light and the tables were set impeccably, each place accompanied by a small card that read with the compliments of Meridian Property Group. Marcus had picked up one of the cards. Read it. Put it down. Picked it up again. My Aunt Claudia arrived next and began commenting on the restaurant's quality and how it was nice that Dad could afford somewhere like this. And Marcus said nothing, still holding the card. My cousin Brent, the one who had said honestly better this way, walked in and immediately started photographing the room for his Instagram, until Claudia told him to put the phone away. My father arrived at 7 on the dot. He had dressed carefully as he always did for significant occasions. A charcoal suit he'd owned for years that still fit him well, a tie my mother had once given him that he kept wearing despite the divorce because he said it was a good tie and the history of a thing didn't change its utility. He looked like what he was. A 60-year-old man who had built something real, even if it had cost him certain relationships in the building. He had a kind of dignity that I had always respected even when I resented what he did with it. Pierre greeted him at the entrance to the private floor with the composed professional warmth he extended to all significant guests. He said he was pleased to welcome the family on such an occasion. He said, because I had asked him to say exactly this in precisely these words. Your daughter asked us to extend you every courtesy and we are very glad to do so. My father stood at the threshold of the room and looked at Pierre. My daughter, he repeated. Ms. Reeves, yes. She prepaid the private floor for the full year. She's a wonderful client. Pierre smiled. Please come in. Your champagne is waiting. My father walked to his seat. He picked up the Meridian card. He turned it over as though there might be an explanation on the back. He set it down. He looked at Marcus, who was looking at the card with an expression I can only describe as a man recalculating something he thought he'd already solved. My aunt said, "Did you know about this?" Nobody answered. My father picked up his fork. He looked at the table, at the beautiful room, at the west window and the city lights beginning to appear as the evening deepened. He thought about something for a long moment. Then he put the fork down. He took out his phone. And he called me. We talked for 11 minutes. I told him what I've told you. The shape of Meridian, the years of it, the choice to stop offering information into a silence that had never once asked for it. He listened with the particular quality that my father had when he was genuinely caught off balance, which was not often. Very still, very quiet, the kind of quiet that meant something was moving behind it. When I finished, he said, I owe you an apology. I hadn't expected that. Not because he was incapable of it. My father was not, at his core, a cruel man, but because it had been so long since the possibility had seemed real. I sat with it for a moment. You don't have to do it tonight, I said. It's your birthday. Elena. His voice had something in it I recognized from a long time ago. The Saturday morning library voice. The sharpest mind I've ever known voice. I'm going to need you to let me do this. I held the phone tighter. Okay, I said. He apologized for the text. For the pattern of texts before it, the uninvitations and the erasures and the years of treating my independence as a referendum on his adequacy as a father. He said he had been afraid, that was the word he used, afraid, that if he acknowledged what I was building he would have to acknowledge something about what he'd chosen to build instead and what it had cost. He said he had turned his fear into a verdict and handed it to the family like it was fact. He was not crying. Neither was I. We were having the conversation the way people have conversations when they are past a certain kind of drama. Not performing grief but actually sitting inside it. I don't know if we can fix it, I said. I'm not asking you to fix anything, he said. I'm just telling you I know. I looked at my book still open on the couch, the page I'd been on for 3 weeks. The city was quiet outside my window. Somewhere across town my father was sitting in a room I owned, at a table I'd paid for, eating food from a restaurant I'd bought, and the whole complicated architecture of that fact. The protection in it, the sadness in it, the small and probably petty satisfaction of it that I was going to be honest with myself about, sat in my chest like a stone that had been there so long it had become part of the foundation. Happy birthday, Dad, I said. Thank you, he said. For the dinner. For all of it. We said goodnight. I should tell you what happened next because the story doesn't end with a phone call, and I've found that people who tell you it does are usually leaving out the part that actually matters. The dinner continued. My father went back to the table and said something to Marcus. I don't know exactly what, but Marcus called me the next morning and the conversation was 23 minutes of him asking questions he'd never asked before and answering questions I'd stopped offering. He did not apologize the way my father had. That's not Marcus's mode. But he asked about Meridian with something that, for the first time I could remember, sounded like genuine interest rather than competitive inventory. I answered honestly. We didn't fix 11 years in 23 minutes. But we were talking on different ground. My Aunt Claudia did not call. I did not expect her to. Some people participate in the diminishment of others not because they've been misled about the facts but because the diminishment serves them, and no amount of facts changes that equation. Claudia had her reasons. Some of them I understood, the long history of her own disappointments and the way people sometimes make a hobby of other people's smallness when their own largeness hasn't worked out as planned. I bore her no particular malice. I also stopped waiting for something that was never going to come. Brent posted the Instagram photo of the dining room anyway. He geotagged it Brasserie Laurent. Got 47 likes. 3 weeks later my father came to my office. He didn't announce it in advance, which I appreciated because advance announcements gave me time to prepare a version of myself, and what I wanted for the first time in a long time was to just be in a room with him. He texted when he was in the lobby, "I'm downstairs if you have 20 minutes. I texted back, "Come up." He stepped out of the elevator into Meridian's reception area and stood for a moment. I watched him from the hallway. He was looking at the wall where we'd hung the original property photographs. The first building, the third, the 17th. A kind of visual timeline of what the company had become. He was looking at them the way he used to look at the blueprints for his own buildings when he thought nobody was watching. Priya showed him to my office. I stood up from behind my desk and for a moment neither of us said anything, because there was a lot of history in the room with us and it didn't all fit neatly into words. He looked around at the office. Not showily, just taking it in the way a man who spent his life in property evaluates a space. "You've got good light in here," he said finally. "South-facing," I said. "I picked the room specifically." He nodded. We sat down. I had Priya bring coffee. My father wrapped both hands around the mug the way he always had, and that small familiar gesture did something to me that all the large dramatic gestures had stopped doing years ago. I had to look out the south-facing window for a moment. We talked for an hour and 40 minutes. He asked about the Milwaukee deal. He asked about the rezoning. He had questions about the acquisition structure for Brasserie Laurent that were sharp and specific, the questions of someone who actually understood property, and I answered them and asked some back, and there was something in the exchange that felt like, not reconciliation exactly because that word implies a return to a previous state and we were not returning to anything. We were building something that hadn't existed before. Slowly, probably imperfectly, with all the scar tissue still present and accounted for. Near the end he said, "I drove you to the library every Saturday." "I remember," I said. I used to tell your mother, that you were going to do something I didn't have a category for yet." He looked at his coffee mug. "I think I got scared of that. I turned it into something else." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry I did that. I know that too." He looked up at me. My father at 60 with the charcoal suit and the good tie and the complicated history and the Saturday mornings, all of it at once. "Can we?" He stopped. "I'd like to try." "So would I said. "But I need you to understand that it's going to look like trying, not like pretending the last 12 years didn't happen." "Understood," he said. And from him, a man who communicated mostly in implications and silences, that single word carried more than he could have said in a paragraph. "I'm not going to tell you we rebuilt everything. This isn't that kind of story, and I've never trusted that kind of story. Because real repair is slower than narrative and messier than resolution, and it doesn't announce itself as conclusive. What I will tell you is this. My father has been to my office 4 times since October. He met Priya and James and the rest of the Meridian team and he asked them the right questions, and they liked him in the way that people like someone who is paying genuine attention. He has not slipped back into the old template, though he has sometimes gotten close to the edge of it and then visibly chosen differently. Marcus and I talk every 2 weeks. We argue sometimes, About methods, about values, about the usual brother and sister translation problem. It is the argument of people who are actually in communication, and I find that I prefer it to the silence we had before. My Aunt Claudia and I are polite at the family events I have begun occasionally to attend. That is all it will probably ever be, and I have stopped needing it to be more. Brasserie Lawrence chicken with the tarragon cream sauce remains, as far as I can tell, the best thing I own. And on Saturday mornings sometimes, when the Chicago light comes through my south-facing window in a particular way and I'm in early before the rest of the team arrives, I think about a man who drove a small girl to the library before the city was awake. Who told her she was the sharpest mind he'd ever known. Who got afraid and got it wrong and then, eventually, imperfectly, not too late, chose differently. Keep that. Alongside everything else. The way you keep the things that cost you something even when they're also, somehow, still yours. If this story made you feel something you're still carrying, that's exactly where I meant to leave you. The comments are open. Tell me which part stayed with you.